Well, let's stay with that story and invite into this conversation Helen Zille, who, of course, historically has vehemently opposed the use of blue light brigades. Helen, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Interesting that we see what is happening now, this, incident involving VIP protection officers in the Deputy President's office. This is a historic issue, one which you've been very passionate about. I wonder your impressions after seeing that video today, if you've seen it at all.
I've seen it, and it was completely and utterly shocking to me. I mean, even if people were trying to stop the convoy, you wouldn't treat people like that, and it didn't look as if those people were trying to do anything to resist arrest or anything at all. They were just really prostrate on the ground and were being kicked and pushed, and it was really very shocking. But you see, this is the consequence of a system that elevates some people above other people. Now, that is the whole problem with these blue light brigades, because it tells the whole public that these people have a time that is more precious than your time, that they can push through the traffic, that they can get other people off the road, that they have more right to be on the road than other people. And of course, that is nonsense. And from that idea springs a lot of very dangerous behavior. So the minute somebody in a blue light brigade thinks, look, everybody, I'm extremely important, I'm driving on this road, you have to get out of the way for me, and if you don't get out of the way, we will make you get out of the way. That is the next step. And so I'm completely opposed to blue light brigades. 99% of the time, they aren't needed for security. They're just needed to make some people look important and for their bodyguards to feel that they are extremely important because they're traveling with a VIP, and then they have to kick everybody out the way who happens to cross their path. And that is the consequence of this totally unhealthy habit of elevating people with the right to bypass other people in traffic and on the road whose time is just as precious as theirs.
Helen, we of course have the opportunity of sort of looking back and now with better hindsight, because you not only oppose this as Western Cape Premier, you also at the forefront of helping to introduce legislation that bans VIP brigades effectively in the Western Cape. Let's talk about how that has changed the situation, and also just some of the resistance that you faced at the time.
Well, of course, there was a lot of resistance, and people were saying, oh, the Western Cape's trying to do things differently again. And I said, yes, we are trying to do things differently because we have a different political philosophy. We don't believe that politicians are more important than the rest of the public. In fact, we are servants of the rest of the public, and we're not their masters. And that is the fundamental point of departure in a democracy. And so it's completely contrary to that ethos to have people running around, ducking through the traffic, and being late for their appointments and having special favors and concessions that other people don't have. It is wrong in principle. And I made a few concessions. There are times when security is important. So, for example, when prisoners are traveling to and from the courts in those huge wagons that carry prisoners, the Department of Correctional Services made the case to me that when those vehicles stop, there's a much greater risk of escapes from those vehicles. And they could prove to me that it was in the interests of security, and legitimately so, for those particular convoys to be able to get through the traffic quicker than other people and to keep those vehicles moving. That made sense to me. And I also made an exception for the president, because I can understand that when you're driving in a convoy, I think the length of his convoy is totally ridiculous and completely unnecessary. But let's grant to the president, he may have the right to a car driving in front and a car driving behind, and you don't want the cars in that convoy to be separated from each other by other cars, then I can understand it for the president's security at the right time and in the right place. But no one else requires it.
Do you think there are lessons that the rest of the country can learn from the Western Cape, especially where we have seen, of course, a failure, at least at a national government level, to onboard these ideas?
Well, you see, people won't onboard these ideas until the voters force them to. the voters in the Western Cape chose a different political philosophy in which politicians are the servants of the public, and that is the consequence. We try to behave like that. And so if people reject that, and if they still see people in political office as high flyers, as people who need to be superior to everybody else, that's the consequence. That's what you're going to get. And then, of course, their bodyguards are going to think that their job is to knock and kick and chase everybody out of the way with whatever amount of force is required. And until the voters say this is unacceptable to us, this kind of thing will continue.
Over the years, of course, the campaign to actually get rid of, these VIP brigades has sort of lost its steam, Helen. Do you think that after this, there will be a re-emergence of that, at least from a national conversation point of view? Because, again, it's not that the abuses subsided during this period. It's just that people, I think, by and large, have gotten used to that behavior, used to that bullying, and, in fact, have accepted it when it happens, when motorists are out on the roads.
Well, I think you chose exactly the right word there, Kathy. It's bullying. It's saying, I'm bigger than you, get out the way or I'll donor you. And that is the consequence. It's sheer bullying in traffic. It's traffic bullying. And we shouldn't be able to stand for it. We should say absolutely not. We're a democracy, a constitutional democracy. Everyone plays by the rules, including the rules of the road. And the people who are supposed to set the example are above all the people who should be held accountable for applying to and conforming to the rules of traffic and the road.
Do we have a track record of these officials being held accountable? If we can look back just even to 10 years ago, when I think, at least on your part, this campaign was about at its height, there were, of course, a number of incidents that took place at that time that could have been pointed to, that made national headlines, that very much required accountability. But over a period of time, do you find that these officers have been held accountable, and that there is a culture that says, if you do this, then even though you are protected because you're part of the SAPS, but there are levers within the law that enable some kind of action to be taken against you?
Well, the Independent Police Investigative Directorate should be able to do that, and I hope they're doing it in this case, and I hope the consequences will be grave. But, there's so many people who have shown that they can get away with all sorts of extreme corruption that, I'm not holding my breath here. IPID, the IPID, has not got a very good track record as far as these kinds of things are concerned. So I'm not holding my breath. I remember in about, I think it was 2012, a young man called Kumani Makwele, who was a student at UCT, was jogging along the road, and I think it was the president's convoy came past, and he flipped a finger at it, which obviously isn't a very polite thing to do, but in a free society you can flip your finger at people if you want to be rude. That's what you can do. And the follow cars stopped, and they got this poor guy, roughed him up, and took him to the police station and got him locked up. Now, that's another form of bullying tactics, total power abuse. And that's when I went to the Mowbray police station and got him released.
Do you think that there's an opportunity for politicians in this, well, at least in this instance, to perhaps be the ones start taking a stand and saying, actually, because these VIP protection officers, by and large, anecdotally, behave as a law unto themselves, then we want something different. We don't want their protection.
Well, certainly, under a DA government, we say, look, if people are at risk, and some people are, we now live in a mafia state. Just yesterday, an IFP councillor was assassinated again. And we have regular assassinations of politicians. It's just horrific, for their jobs or for whatever. That's what we have in South Africa. So there are cases where people do need bodyguards. They do need bodyguards. But that has to be the subject of a fair assessment. And what I have found, to my absolute horror in local authorities, is that people do an assessment, claim that they're at risk, and get security contracts worth tens of millions of rands in small local authorities that can't afford it. And then that is how to get the money out of the local authority that is then used for corrupt purposes and redistributed to politicians by the security companies. This also goes on. So it's this complete immunity to the rules and the abuse of power that seems to be just accepted as a cultural norm in South Africa.
All right.
And it is that we are so fundamentally opposed to.
All right. Helen Zille, thanks for your time tonight. We'll leave it there for tonight. And, of course, speaking there in her capacity as a former Western Cape Premier and some of the work that she did in the Western Cape, at least to ban, by and large, the use of these VIP brigade or motorcades. And, of course, Thembekile, one of the difficulties with the story is that there is a historic record, as Helen was saying there, of just bad behavior and abuses by some of these individuals.
And we're actually showing you, in fact, a timeline, if you will, just a brief summary of what has happened, especially from about 2009 or so, what you're looking at now. Well, let's go back to 2009, because in February of that year, a pedestrian was basically killed by a car that was part of President Jacob Zuma's motorcade. This happened in Ulundi in KwaZulu-Natal, and it shows you, isn't it, we're talking tonight about something that happened in Gauteng. Helen Zille was reflecting on the Western Cape, and this right here in 2009 was in KZN, so it's not specific to one area. In fact, it's right across the country.
Here's another case that made, headlines. Thomas Ferreira, his motorbike hit by an official vehicle of the then Cocta MEC Humphrey Memeza in Randfontein. And, he ended up having to spend months, actually, in hospital as he tried to recover from that incident.
2015, January of that year, 2 cyclists were allegedly assaulted in Cape Town for not clearing the road fast enough for one of these convoys. And that's a recurring story, even in looking at people who've been tweeting, people calling into radio saying that they've had so many experiences where you're basically rushed off the road because these people with blue lights simply want to force their way through.
As you can see there, 2015, a man killed in a crash, and that involved the then State Security Minister, David Mahlobo's convoy, and that was in Mpumalanga.
Then in September 2016, another man allegedly assaulted by members of the VIP protection unit in Pretoria. He too is said to have been beaten up because he simply did not pull over fast enough for them to get through.
Yes, some of these stories are really, really incredulous. And as you can see there, 2017, a Durban woman, she was injured. Her car forced off the road, again, by a speeding convoy. One of the ones that struck me as well, Thembekile, is one in 2009, a VIP officer, and he was on his way to collect the then mayor of the Msunduzi municipality. He spat in the eye of a woman who was on the road also. And the reason is that you're not moving too quickly enough. You're seeing me, but you're not giving me that authority.
And how dare you not move?
Exactly. And it's part of what Helen is talking about, is that there are these rights and privileges that seem to be extended to VIP protection officers that the rest of us simply don't enjoy, and they act like they're a law unto themselves.
But also, what is the rush? If you've gone to a government event, I mean, how many times have you got there and the political principal was actually on time? So what is the rush, really, if you're going to be late anyway?
And that's probably part of the point, right? That, if we all just maybe make it on time for our appointments. Unfortunately, the case law on this issue is quite interesting because due to the definitions around the VIPs and how they come to be classified or characterized as VIPs, allows and enables some of this behavior that we see. That's why the fundamental change is really going to come out of a change in legislation.